My wife mocked me with a fake breakup in front of her friends. My calm, done, left them all speechless. I never expected to walk into my own public execution on a random Tuesday evening, but that's exactly what Jessica had orchestrated. I left work early that afternoon, around 4:30 instead of my usual 6 o'clock, because I'd finished the quarterly tax projections ahead of schedule at my accounting firm in downtown Chicago. I grabbed takeout from that Italian place on Michigan Avenue and headed home to our suburban house in Naperville, thinking we'd have a quiet evening together. When I pulled into our driveway at 5:15, I noticed 4 unfamiliar cars parked along the street. I grabbed the bag of pasta and walked through our front door expecting the usual quiet. Instead, I walked into what felt like a staged performance. Jessica stood in the center of our living room, surrounded by 5 of her closest friends from her book club, Melissa, Stephanie, Karen, Nicole, and Brittany, all holding champagne flutes like they were at some kind of event. The furniture had been rearranged, our coffee table pushed back, chairs positioned in a semicircle facing the entrance like an audience configuration. Her friends stared at me with expressions I'd never seen before, this mixture of pity and anticipation that looked disturbingly like entertainment. "Derek," Jessica said, her voice unnaturally loud, projecting like she was addressing a crowd instead of 6 people in a living room. "I'm so glad you're finally home. We need to talk about something important." I set the takeout on the entry table and looked around, trying to understand what I'd walked into. The champagne suggested celebration, but Jessica's expression was performing crisis. "I've been doing a lot of soul-searching lately," she continued, pausing after each phrase for her audience to react with sympathetic nods. "And I've realized that I've been suffocating in this marriage, losing myself piece by piece, compromising who I am to fit into this life we've built." She gestured around our living room like it was a prison rather than the house we'd spent 2 years renovating together. "I need space to breathe, to rediscover the woman I was before I became just Derek's wife, before I let someone else's expectations define my entire existence." I stood there processing not the content but the delivery. This was clearly scripted, with strategic pauses timed for maximum impact. Her friends reacted on cue, gasping when she mentioned suffocation, nodding when she talked about losing herself. One even wiped away a tear. "I think we need to take a break," Jessica said, building to her planned crescendo. "A serious break where we both figure out what we really want, because I can't keep pretending everything is fine when I'm dying inside every single day." She looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to break down, to beg, to give her the dramatic reaction that would validate whatever story she'd constructed. Her friends leaned forward, phones positioned like they were recording, everyone waiting for me to play my assigned role. But standing there watching this woman I'd been married to for 7 years perform my public humiliation for an audience she'd carefully assembled, something inside me went completely cold and clear. I didn't feel anger or heartbreak, just absolute clarity that I was watching someone reveal who they actually were. I reached down and removed my wedding ring, the simple gold band I'd worn since our ceremony in Grant Park, and walked past her frozen audience to set it deliberately on the coffee table. "Consider yourself free," I said quietly, nothing theatrical, just fact. Then I turned and walked back toward the door, picked up my briefcase, left the Italian takeout sitting there, and headed to my car. Behind me, complete silence, no laughter, no applause, nothing. Just stunned quiet where Jessica's cruel victory party was supposed to bloom. I didn't look back as I pulled out of the driveway, didn't see her face or her friends' reactions. She'd wanted a performance that would leave me destroyed and elevate her status as the liberated woman escaping a boring marriage, but instead she got my complete, calm, final exit from whatever game she thought we were playing. I drove to a Hampton in downtown Chicago, barely registering the route I took or the traffic around me, my mind replaying the evening's events through an entirely different lens now that shock was transforming into analytical clarity. The breakup wasn't just public, it was weaponized, designed specifically to strip me of dignity while elevating Jessica's status as the liberated woman escaping what she'd surely described to everyone as a suffocating marriage. I checked into a basic room with a view of nothing special and sat on the edge of the bed, finally letting myself think through what I'd actually witnessed. Her friends' phones had been strategically positioned, I realized now, probably recording the entire scene for social media circulation, for group chats, for whatever audience Jessica wanted to perform for beyond the 5 women in our living room. What disturbed me most wasn't the cruelty itself but the planning it required. She'd chosen the specific timing, assembled her audience, rehearsed her lines, arranged the furniture for optimal staging. This wasn't an impulsive decision or an emotional breaking point. This was calculated theater, and I'd been cast as the villain who didn't even know there was a script. I ordered pizza from the hotel's recommended list and started thinking about the past few months with this new understanding, and suddenly patterns emerged that I'd been too trusting or too tired to notice before. Jessica had developed this sudden obsession with fitness classes at odd hours, leaving for the gym at 9 p.m. on weeknights when she used to be in bed by 10. She'd bought new lingerie that I'd discovered by accident in the back of her drawer, still in shopping bags with tags attached, pieces she'd never worn around me. There were unexplained charges on our credit card to restaurants we'd never visited together. Nothing huge, always under $100, easy to overlook individually but adding up to a pattern when I thought about it now. She'd also started this weird habit of turning her phone face down on every surface, something she'd never done in 7 years of marriage. I remembered one evening about 6 weeks ago when I'd picked it up to hand it to her and she'd practically lunged across the couch to snatch it from me, then laughed it off as being startled. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it, just one of those random moments. Now it felt significant. The text messages she'd receive at weird hours that she'd glance at and smile before quickly dismissing. The girls' nights that had increased from once a month to twice a week. The way she'd stopped asking about my day or sharing details about hers, like we'd become roommates instead of spouses. I pulled out my laptop and logged into our shared cloud storage, something we'd set up years ago for sharing photos and documents, and I started looking through recent uploads with fresh perspective. Jessica had always been careless about digital security, letting everything auto-sync because she found manual backup annoying. There were photos from the past 3 months that I'd never seen, her at restaurants I didn't recognize, her at what looked like hotel pools, her in outfits I'd never seen her wear. In several photos, there was a partial view of someone else, a man's hand on a table, a man's shoulder in the edge of the frame, always just out of focus enough to maintain plausible deniability. I sat there staring at my laptop screen in a generic hotel room, and the truth settled over me like cold water. Tonight's performance wasn't about ending our marriage, it was about publicly destroying me while concealing something darker she'd already been doing. The cruelty wasn't the breakup itself but the method, the humiliation, the audience. She wanted me broken and discredited, wanted witnesses to my supposed inadequacy, wanted a story she could tell where she was the victim finally finding her voice. But victims don't choreograph their liberation with champagne and camera phones. Predators do. Over the next 2 weeks, I transformed our shared home office into a war room, methodically gathering evidence while Jessica believed I was simply moved out to process things, like she'd apparently been telling people. I texted her on day 3 that I needed time and space, keeping communication minimal and businesslike, which she seemed perfectly happy with based on her brief responses. Meanwhile, I took a week of vacation time from the firm and dedicated myself to understanding exactly what my marriage had actually been. I accessed our shared cloud storage systematically, and I discovered Jessica had been remarkably sloppy with digital security. Her laptop automatically synced to all our shared devices, including the iPad I'd set up for her that she rarely used but never disconnected. Text messages appeared in iCloud, complete and undelete, revealing a months-long affair with someone named Travis who was apparently her personal trainer at that expensive gym she joined 8 months ago. The messages were explicit in ways that made my stomach turn, not because of the sexual content but because of how they mocked me. He actually thinks I'm at yoga, one message read, followed by laughing emojis. Derek's so clueless it's almost sad, another said. He made dinner tonight like nothing's wrong. I literally can't. I took screenshots of everything, organized by date, creating a comprehensive timeline that stretched back to January. Her calendar told an even clearer story, entries labeled yoga and spin class and book club that corresponded exactly with hotel check-ins I found through credit card statements. She'd been using our joint card for some of these, not even trying to hide the charges, probably figuring I never looked at the statements closely since I trusted her to manage her own spending. The Hilton Garden Inn in Schaumburg appeared 6 times. The Marriott in Oak Brook 3 times. Always on weekday afternoons, always for 3 to 4 hours. I found Venmo transactions too, payments to Travis Morrison with captions like training session and wellness coaching that totaled over $3,000 in the past 5 months. But when I cross-referenced the dates with gym records I'd called pretending to be verifying her membership, half of those payment dates didn't correspond with any actual gym visits. She'd been paying his rent, I realized, funding his lifestyle while telling me her increased expenses were for self-care and investing in her health. The most damning evidence came from voice memos I found buried in her phone backup. She'd recorded herself practicing the breakup speech, multiple versions of it, trying out different phrasings and emphases like an actress rehearsing for an audition. "I've been suffocating," she said in one take, then stopped and laughed. "God, that sounds so dramatic. But he'll buy it." In another recording, she was talking to someone, Travis, based on the context, workshopping the whole performance. "I'm thinking Tuesday," she said. "Melissa and the girls can come over, we'll have champagne, make it like a celebration. They'll come home and walk into it. It'll be perfect." Travis's voice in the background said something I couldn't make out, and Jessica laughed. "He's going to look so pathetic. I almost feel bad, but honestly, he deserves it for being so boring." I sat in our home office listening to my wife rehearse my humiliation, and I felt something I'd never experienced before, not heartbreak or anger, but clinical detachment, like I was reviewing evidence for a client's case rather than my own life. I compiled everything into organized folders on an external drive: text messages, calendar entries, credit card statements, hotel receipts, Venmo transactions, voice memos, photos. I made multiple backup copies and stored them in different locations. Then I called a divorce attorney my colleague had recommended, a woman named Patricia Chin who supposedly handled high-conflict cases. I sent her the evidence package before our consultation, and when we met in her downtown office 3 days later, she looked at me with something like sympathy. "This is incredibly thorough documentation," she said, reviewing the files on her laptop. "And frankly, it's going to devastate her position in court. The affair is clear, the financial misappropriation is documented, and those voice recordings establish premeditation and intent to cause emotional harm." "What does that mean practically?" I asked. "It means you're going to come out of this divorce very favorably," Patricia said. "Illinois is a no-fault state, but infidelity still matters in asset division and spousal support determinations. With this evidence, she has no leverage. None." Rather than immediately exposing Jessica, I decided to craft a calculated counterperformance that would mirror her theatrical cruelty, and Patricia agreed this approach would strengthen my position. "Let her think she's winning," she advised. "Let her get comfortable with whatever narrative she's building. The harder she commits to lies, the worse the collapse will be." I started monitoring Jessica's activity through mutual friends, and what I discovered was both predictable and infuriating. She'd been portraying herself as the victim of a controlling husband, gaining sympathy and social capital from our entire community. Our neighbor Karen posted on Facebook about supporting women who find the courage to leave difficult situations, clearly referencing Jessica. Melissa shared an article about emotional manipulation in marriages with a comment about finally seeing the truth. Jessica had even started a blog called Reclaiming My Truth, where she posted vague but damning accusations about being controlled and diminished, carefully avoiding specific details that could be disproven but painting a picture of me as some kind of oppressive presence in her life. "He monitored my spending," one post read. "Made me account for every dollar like I was a child asking for allowance." I'd literally never questioned a single purchase she made until I discovered thousands going to her affair partner. "He isolated me from friends," another claimed. "Made me feel guilty for having my own social life separate from him." I'd actively encouraged her book club and girls' nights, had never once complained about her going out. The rewriting of our history was comprehensive and strategic. When Jessica texted me asking if I'd be willing to attend marriage counseling, I saw the trap immediately but agreed anyway, knowing it would give me opportunities to document her contradictions. "I think we owe it to our marriage to try," she wrote, and I almost laughed at the performance of concern. We started seeing Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a therapist in Wheaton, twice a week. I played the confused husband seeking reconciliation, asking earnest questions about what I'd done wrong and how I could improve, while secretly recording every session on my phone tucked in my jacket pocket. Illinois was a two-party consent state for recordings, but there were exceptions for gathering evidence of crimes, and Patricia Chin assured me financial fraud qualified. Jessica contradicted herself constantly in therapy. In one session, she claimed I never listened to her needs. In the next, she admitted I'd always been attentive but in the wrong ways. She said I was financially controlling, then accidentally mentioned I'd never questioned her spending. Dr. Hoffman started noticing, I could tell, her expression growing more skeptical as sessions progressed. "Jessica, last week you said Derek made all the financial decisions," Dr. Hoffman said during our 5th session. "But today you mentioned he didn't even look at credit card statements. Can you help me understand?" Jessica fumbled through an explanation about different types of control that satisfied no one. Meanwhile, I hired a forensic accountant Patricia Chen recommended, and he uncovered something I'd missed. Jessica had been slowly draining our joint savings into a separate account under her name only, moving $800 to $1,200 every few weeks for the past 6 months. The total was nearly $18,000, money she transferred from our shared savings that was supposed to be for a down payment on a bigger house. She'd been preparing her exit strategy for months, building a financial cushion while actively planning my public humiliation. "This constitutes financial fraud in a marriage," the accountant, David Brennan, told me. "She was systematically hiding marital assets with clear intent to deprive you of your share. This is serious." I added his report to my growing evidence file, each new piece making the picture clearer. Jessica hadn't just cheated, she'd orchestrated an elaborate plan to leave me emotionally destroyed, publicly humiliated, and financially disadvantaged. The counseling sessions continued, and Dr. Hoffman's patience was clearly wearing thin. After our 7th session, she asked to speak with me privately while Jessica waited in the lobby. "Derek, I need to be frank with you," she said, closing her office door. "I'm observing patterns of deception and manipulation that make me question whether reconciliation is even possible. Jessica's narratives are inconsistent, and she shows no genuine accountability for her role in the marriage's breakdown. I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you that what I'm seeing concerns me deeply." I started strategically rebuilding relationships with people Jessica had isolated me from over the years, beginning with her own family members who'd grown increasingly concerned about her behavior. Her mother Carol lived in Joliet, about an hour from us, and I'd always gotten along well with her despite Jessica's efforts to limit our contact. I called Carol and asked if we could meet for coffee, and she agreed immediately with what sounded like relief in her voice. We met at a Starbucks halfway between our locations, and Carol looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that suggested she'd been carrying worry for a long time. "I'm glad you reached out," she said before I could even explain why I'd wanted to meet. "I've been concerned about Jessica for months now. She's been acting strange, secretive, and when I ask her about it, she gets defensive and accusatory." I told Carol about the breakup performance, though I left out the affair details initially, and watched her face cycle through shock, anger, and finally resignation. "That sounds exactly like something she'd do," Carol said quietly. "Derek, I need to tell you something I've never told anyone outside the family. Jessica has always had this cruel streak, even as a child. She would publicly humiliate other kids at school for entertainment, find their weaknesses and exploit them in front of audiences. I thought she'd grown out of it, but maybe you can't grow out of who you fundamentally are." She told me about incidents from Jessica's teenage years, posting embarrassing photos of classmates online, orchestrating social exclusion campaigns, once convincing a girl's boyfriend to break up with her at a school assembly as a joke. Carol had taken her to therapists, tried to address the behavior, but Jessica had learned to hide it better rather than change it. "I'd hoped marriage would settle her," Carol said. "That having a stable partner like you would bring out her better nature. I'm sorry I was wrong." I asked if she'd be willing to provide a statement about Jessica's character patterns, and Carol agreed without hesitation. Next, I tracked down Travis's ex-girlfriend through some social media detective work. Her name was Simone Patterson, and she'd dated Travis for 2 years before their relationship ended about a year ago. I sent her a careful message explaining that I was going through a divorce and had reason to believe my wife had been involved with Travis, and asked if she'd be willing to talk. She responded within an hour. "I've been waiting for someone to ask me about him," her message said. We met at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, and Simone brought a folder of her own documentation: texts, emails, bank statements. "Travis has a pattern," she explained. "He targets married women with money, usually ones who work out at expensive gyms. He's charming, attentive, makes them feel special and young. Then he slowly extracts money from them, training sessions, rent help, car payments, whatever he can get. Once the money dries up or the situation gets too complicated, he disappears and moves on to the next one." She showed me evidence of 3 other women Travis had done this to, including one who'd lost her marriage and $40,000 before realizing she'd been played. "He's a predator," Simone said flatly. "And he's good at it because he makes these women feel like they're special, like they're different from everyone else. They're not. They're just wallets with wedding rings." I asked if she'd be willing to testify or provide statements, and she agreed immediately. If it helps stop him from doing this to someone else, absolutely. I compiled testimony from neighbors who'd witnessed Travis entering our home during work hours. Mrs. Chun from next door had security cameras that captured him arriving at 2 p.m. on multiple occasions. The gym manager, a guy named Robert, confided that he'd been concerned about Travis's unprofessional conduct but hadn't had grounds to fire him until recently when another complaint came in. I gathered statements from Jessica's coworkers who'd heard her bragging about playing her husband, about having a backup plan, about how easy it was to manipulate men. Each piece of evidence was time-stamped, verified, and prepared for public presentation. I even obtained security footage from the Hilton Garden Inn in Schaumburg showing Jessica and Travis checking in together on 3 separate occasions, their body language making it clear this wasn't a business arrangement. The hotel manager was sympathetic when I explained the situation and provided copies of the footage along with registration records showing the rooms had been paid for with our joint credit card. Jessica texted me 3 weeks after the initial breakup asking if I'd meet her for a closure dinner at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse in River North, the restaurant where we'd celebrated our 5th anniversary. "I think we both deserve proper closure," her message said. "A chance to end things with dignity and respect." I knew immediately this was another performance, but I agreed because Patricia Chun thought it was the perfect opportunity. I arrived at 7 p.m. on Thursday and walked into the private dining area Jessica had reserved, only to discover she'd transformed our closure dinner into another audience event. Her book club friends were already seated: Melissa, Stephanie, Karen, Nicole, and Brittany, wearing expressions of supportive solidarity, clearly briefed on whatever narrative Jessica had prepared. The table was set with wine glasses and appetizers, lighting dim and intimate, suggesting careful staging. Before Jessica could launch into whatever speech she'd rehearsed, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out 6 leather folders I'd had professionally bound, each containing a complete evidence package with printed photos, bank statements, text message transcripts, and timeline documentation. "I brought some things to share," I said calmly, distributing a folder to each person at the table, including Jessica. The room went silent as they opened the folders. I watched their faces cycle through confusion, shock, and horror as they processed what they were reading. Melissa went pale reading text messages where Jessica called her useful but tedious, the kind of friend you keep around because she makes you look better. Stephanie discovered messages where Jessica had been fabricating stories about her financial problems to create social drama. Karen found herself described as desperate for relevance, clinging to youth through other people's drama. Each woman was discovering how Jessica actually viewed them. Nicole stared at bank statements showing money Jessica had drained from our joint account. "Jessica, you told us Derek controlled all the finances," she said quietly. "But these show you had full access and were transferring thousands to a separate account." Brittany had found the text messages about Travis, explicit conversations leaving no doubt about the affair. You said you needed to leave because Derek was emotionally unavailable, Brittany said, voice shaking. You never mentioned an affair. Jessica's face went from confident to panicked as she scrambled through her folder. This is out of context, she started, but I cut her off. Everything is dated and time-stamped. The timeline speaks for itself. The restaurant manager quietly moved other diners away, recognizing the situation's volatility. I pulled out my phone, connected it to a portable speaker, and played the audio file, Jessica's voice memo practicing her breakup speech, including cruel jokes about my appearance and earning potential. He's so predictable, her recorded voice said, followed by laughter. I swear he thinks love means showing up and being stable. Like that's enough. Travis makes me feel alive. Derek makes me feel like I'm already retired. Her friends sat frozen, listening to Jessica mock not just me but the entire concept of reliability. When the recording ended, silence was absolute. I'm happy to provide copies of everything to anyone who wants them, I said. The security footage from hotels, witness statements, the forensic accounting report showing financial fraud. It's all documented and verified. I stood up, left $200 on the table. That should cover my portion of dinner. Then I picked up my briefcase and looked at Jessica directly. You wanted a performance. You wanted an audience. You wanted to destroy me publicly while hiding what you'd actually been doing. So here's your performance, the truth, documented and witnessed. I walked toward the exit, and behind me I heard nothing but stunned silence. No one defended Jessica, no one called after me. In the window reflection, I caught a glimpse of Jessica sitting frozen at the table, surrounded by friends who were now looking at her like strangers, unable to construct any lie that could overcome documented truth. The divorce proceedings moved with surprising speed once Jessica's attorney reviewed the evidence package Patricia Chin sent over. We met in Patricia's conference room 4 weeks after the restaurant confrontation, and Jessica looked completely different. No makeup, hair pulled back carelessly, wearing jeans instead of her usual curated outfits. Her attorney did most of the talking while Jessica stared at the table. The settlement was straightforward and brutal for her. She got the house since it had been purchased with my inheritance, but had to buy me out of my equity or sell within 6 months. She owed me spousal support for 2 years due to the affair destroying the marriage. The $18,000 she'd hidden had to be returned and split evenly. She kept her car, personal belongings, and her credit card debt. I kept my retirement accounts, investments, and dignity. Jessica signed everything without argument. Travis abandoned her within a week of the restaurant incident, according to Simone. Once the money stopped and things became publicly messy, he disappeared completely, blocked her everywhere, and moved on to targeting someone new at a different gym. The predator had found easier prey. Jessica's social circle evaporated overnight. Her friends wanted nothing to do with her after seeing how she actually viewed them. Her blog disappeared. Her Instagram went private, then inactive. I heard she'd moved back with her mother in Joliet, taking a retail job because her reputation in luxury real estate marketing was destroyed. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, just distant acknowledgement that consequences had natural weight. I started therapy with Dr. James Morrison, who specialized in processing betrayal and rebuilding trust. The sessions forced me to confront not just Jessica's actions but my own complicity in ignoring warning signs, my tendency to prioritize peace over honesty, my fear of conflict that had made me an easy target. You didn't cause what she did, Dr. Morrison told me. But you can learn from how you responded to early red flags. Not to blame yourself, but to build better boundaries for the future. 6 months after the divorce finalized, my firm offered me a senior position in their Seattle office, a promotion with significant raise and complete geographical fresh start. I accepted without hesitation. Chicago held too many memories, too many places where I'd see Jessica's ghost. I needed distance, new surroundings, a chance to build something entirely mine. Seattle was rain and coffee and mountains, a city where no one knew my story unless I chose to tell it. I bought a small condo in Capitol Hill, joined a gym where I actually worked out, and started exploring the city on weekends. Jessica attempted periodic contact through email since I'd blocked her number, messages starting apologetic and becoming desperate. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know I understand what I destroyed, one read. Dr. Morrison helped me recognize these as manipulation disguised as accountability, seeking absolution to ease her guilt rather than genuine remorse. I never responded. 8 months into Seattle life, I met Isabel Ross at a firm networking event, a senior financial analyst from the San Francisco office. She was sharp and funny, with this direct way of speaking that reminded me honesty could be refreshing. We started having coffee, then lunch, then actual dates that felt easy and natural. "So what's your story?" Isabel asked during our third dinner. "Everyone's got one." I told her an abbreviated version: married young, didn't work out, divorced, moved for a fresh start. I didn't mention the public humiliations or affair or evidence folders. Not because I was hiding anything, but because that story didn't define me anymore. "Fair enough," Isabel said. "For what it's worth, their loss is clearly Seattle's gain." We took things slowly, neither rushing toward commitment, both carrying histories that made us cautious. But there was something genuine building, something that felt like possibility instead of performance. A year after the divorce, I realized I'd gone an entire week without thinking about Jessica once. That felt like the real milestone, the moment when the past finally loosened its grip and let me walk forward unencumbered.